and welcome. I'm James Hands from Awaken Therapy, and it's so important now to get into our healing work. It's so important as we go through these times of change and transition. Anything that's stuck, any residue that's still trapped inside us, and that's what trauma is. It's essentially stuck energy, stuck life experience, is holding us down like a heavy ballast. If we're not clearing it at the moment, we're going to feel the pressure of it, the burden of it, the retrograde nature of it more than ever. So yeah, let's get stuck into our healing work, taking full responsibility for that, especially now on this beautiful planet. So I wanted to talk about childhood trauma because it's often invisible. Our childhood trauma can often be invisible because what happens young happens really deep. It can be very buried, it can be very suppressed. Just to cope, just to survive, we're amazing beings, and children, we have a lot of energy, we have a lot of strength, and we can do these amazing things to cope with overwhelming experience. There could be overt trauma or covert trauma. I'll talk about that more in another video. But our childhood trauma, the stuck experiences, difficulties, obvious and not so obvious from childhood, can be invisible, not because it doesn't matter, not because it's not there. Because we've forgotten something doesn't mean it's not having an impact. It's just that we are very creative and very powerful at surviving. So we might have consciously suppressed memory or unconsciously repressed those memories. We have ways of storing up emotion that's too overwhelming, that's too big, too challenging to deal with. All these events, these experiences, if we're not getting a lot of good support to process it, if we're not getting that empathic witnessing to deal with it at the time, it really gets pushed down into the body-mind, and it gets stored there in the cell receptors, in our mind. Physically, it's a chemical thing. It's the neuropeptides, those emotions. So those chemicals get stored literally in the cells, in the cell receptors. In our mind, we would talk about the subconscious mind. Things get pushed out of view, out of awareness. They become subconscious awareness. Our emotions, everything is connected. The emotions and feelings, they're really the chemicals of it, which are connected to these memories. And so, yeah, the invisibility of our trauma doesn't mean it's not having a massive impact. And so, to heal this, usually we start with our symptoms. Things are showing up problematically in symptomatic ways, such as anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive behaviors, different strong emotional reactions to things. It can show up in anger, a lot of aggressive kind of rage. It can show up in pleasing behaviour, in an excessive giving or a lack of boundary setting. It can show up in withdrawal, retreat. That can collapse into even ADD or clinical depression. It can show up in a tendency to run away or to avoid or to disconnect and dissociate. And in those extreme forms in the mind, we would label that ADHD. That's very commonly diagnosed these days, but it's usually diagnosed as the chemical problem rather than what's the trauma generating that running that's going on in the mind, if not physically. So ADHD, all these things are symptoms of underlying issues, blocks in the energy systems of the body. And we need our therapy, we need our hypnotherapy, we need our inner work, we need our kinesiology, we need our breath work, we need all these wonderful modalities that are available now to help us unblock, unjam these energies. Not easy because we're facing difficult things, but certainly possible, and certainly our life becomes freer and better and better and better through clearing the ballast. So what are some other symptomatic ways we can know that we've got this invisible childhood trauma? Well, addictions is a common one. Think of anything being used addictively. Like, I need to do this thing, use this substance or whatever it is to self-medicate, to manage my feelings. Very common ones these days are things like food. A lot of the food we're sold these days in our over-processed, unhealthy food system world, thank you greedy profit people who just make money out of an essential need. A lot of food is designed to be addictive, and it's not about nutrition. It's not about what we need, physically for our health. It's about what keeps our emotions down, what satisfies our emotional needs. Think of things like chips that are designed to have a satisfying crunch, but there's something gratifying in that. It's a food that we can use to medicate. Think of dairy, ice cream, things like this. Once again, that can be emotional eating sort of food. I mean, it's a usual kind of running joke, isn't it? Someone has a relationship breakup and they go to the Ben and Jerry's. So understanding food as a way of managing emotion. Same for screens, TV, scrolling, movies. These things can be very numbing. When we look at a screen, when we're watching TV or something, it puts us into a mild hypnagogic state. It's like a mild form of hypnosis. It's not healing anything, and it's not a complete release, but it is a mild, well, not sedative, but it's a mild sort of dissociative state. So we can use these things addictively. I certainly spent a lot of my younger years using a combination of sugary foods and movies. That was a good way I found to self-medicate when I was still under the weight of so much of my childhood trauma. Other things we can use addictively, well, obviously smoking, drugs, from alcohol to cannabis to methamphetamines, the whole range, the whole gamut of drugs can be used in a self-medicating ways. There are some drugs that we can use in sacred forms. There's certain drugs that are used in sacred rituals, so that's not an addictive thing. I mean, when those drugs are used properly, like psilocybin and things, it might be a ritual practice that's done once a year. That's not really in the same category. But when we're using any substance as a way of managing our emotions, these are all symptomatic. These are symptoms that there's underlying work to do. There's underlying issues there. So you can have a think, is there something you find yourself using compulsively? Sex and porn and things like this is very common these days as a drug of choice. So many things available now that we can use in these addictive ways. But if we just try to treat things on the level of the symptom, as if that's the only problem, then often what happens is people just trade one drug for another drug. One issue moves to another issue. Someone's gambling addiction gets replaced with a sex addiction. Someone's alcohol addiction gets replaced with a food addiction. So, as Gabor Mate says, we need to look at the trauma behind the addiction. And usually there's a trauma behind an addiction. I would say it's 95% of the time there's significant trauma behind an addictive behaviour. So when we get to the trauma, when we explore, when we start to work at what might be buried, hidden, completely invisible, completely forgotten about, completely denied, then we're really getting some traction, because as we clear the underlying stress, the underlying issues, the underlying blockages in our body and mind, then we have more and more choice around the addictive behaviours. We have more and more relief in the symptoms. They don't tend to go away overnight. Sometimes they can shift dramatically. But things like anxiety will just dial down dramatically as we deal with the underlying fear and anger. Depression will reduce automatically as we deal with the underlying sadness and anger. Addictive behaviours, well, we still have to deal with the physiological addiction, perhaps, of a substance like alcohol or smoking. But how much easier is it to break those habits, to step out of those habits, replace those habits, when we've dealt with the underlying charge that's been serving a purpose of avoiding. So I hope you found that interesting. I'll share some more about these themes, but I just urge you to jump even more deeply into your healing process. If you haven't engaged with therapy, telling your story, going into deeper process work, find it now, seek it now, get onto it now, because as the energies amplify, our blocks are highlighted more and more. They're becoming louder and louder. It's never been a better time for doing the inner work. It's never been a more important time, really, to do the inner work. So I'm here for you as you need. Have a look in the link below for my free Soul Warrior course that talks about the healing process, and there's some guided hypnotherapy in that as well. Stacks of stuff on the YouTube channel, the podcasts. Reach out if you have any questions, make any comments. Please like and subscribe, and Godspeed on your healing journey.